Got it. So I can start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Quigley House University. My name is Jennifer Rodriguez. I am the CEO of Quigley House, and I am here with Ellissa Jordan to discuss National Suicide Prevention Month, which is in September. We've chosen this topic for our Quigley House University this month because it is extremely important. And I think as a society, we've all seen the impact of isolation, depression, anxiety, given during the pandemic, especially. So we really wanted to make sure that this was a topic that got addressed. It's something that we are frequently asked about if we have resources for. So we wanted to make sure that all of you got this information today. We do want to start off by saying that this is very sensitive conversation, and it might not be something that you feel comfortable viewing or talking about in front of other people. So just know that the topics we're going to be discussing specifically today include suicide, depression, the correlation with that, and domestic violence and sexual assault. And then we're going to be providing resources for those topics as well. The conversation will include things like general statistics, common signs and symptoms, and a general description of suicide. So as I stated earlier, September is National Suicide Prevention Month, and we discuss these things to raise awareness on the stigmatized and often taboo topic. In addition to shifting public perception, we use this month to spread hope and vital information to people affected by suicide. Our goal is ensuring that individuals, friends, and families have access to the resources that they need to discuss suicide prevention and to seek help. One of the things I want to make sure that you all walk away knowing today is that suicidal thoughts, or as they're professionally called, suicidal ideation, it is a real feeling. It is not something that people can magically turn off. It's not something that people throw around casually. Generally speaking, if somebody is expressing these thoughts and feelings, please believe them, understand that they are struggling with something real, and that in that moment, they truly believe that that is the only option. They may believe that it's better for friends and family. They might believe that it will cause less problems in their work, in their school. So understand it's a real solution to a problem that they're having. And it's definitely not something that they can just stop. There is a definitive link between suicide, domestic violence, and sexual assaults. The reason being is that oftentimes people who experience domestic violence and sexual assault are experiencing isolation. They're being controlled. They're being physically, emotionally traumatized. And again, it is a real solution to a big problem. And we're going to get to more of the symptomatic side of suicide.
And we do want to note, we're going to be talking a lot about domestic violence and sexual violence and suicide, but we do know that not all suicide follow-throughs or attempts are a direct result of like domestic violence or sexual assault. Sometimes it's other factors that go into that. So we don't want to isolate anybody or say like, hey, this type of feelings or situation is less valid than those, because we all know that obviously this is a big thing if you feel as though that is the solution to that problem. So every single reasoning or situation is definitely valid in that. So we just wanted to clarify that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Ellissa. I appreciate you reminding me of that fact. We're obviously focusing on the connection between domestic violence and sexual assault because that's what we do at Quigley House. We work with survivors who have experienced these traumatic crimes. However, suicide also has a great connection to mental health issues. And obviously, you do not have to experience domestic violence and sexual violence to have a mental health concern. So as you can see on these beautiful slides that Ellissa created for us this evening, domestic victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior. We know just from looking at the power and control wheel that the tactics that abusers use specifically are intended to control how someone thinks and feels. And they want people to feel as if they don't have a support system. Well, that's also one of the leading contributions to suicidal ideations or suicidal thoughts, is that you feel that you don't have a support system. So obviously, if we're looking at this from a healthy perspective, a way to stay healthy is to always make sure that you have a healthy support system, whether that be your family, your church, your work community, but that's important for the prevention of these thoughts. We also know that studies suggest that there is a relationship between intimate partner violence and depression and suicidal behavior. Immediate risk factors. Some behaviors may indicate that a person is at immediate risk of suicide. This is really what you want to pay very critical attention to. When somebody has reached this point in their thoughts and their feelings, as I said, I mean, they're not in control of their thoughts. They don't have the ability to shift their thinking immediately. They need professional intervention. They need professional help. Just talking to your friend is not really going to be enough. So if you are experiencing an interaction with someone where they begin talking about wanting to kill themselves, or you notice that they are looking for a way to kill themselves. So you find that they have Googled things online, you come across information in their bedroom or something like that, or they begin talking about feeling hopeless and having no reason to live. And what you really want to pay attention to is that somebody doesn't foresee the future as being hopeful. You definitely want to make sure that you're reaching out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And we have that number here for you. It's 1-800-273-TALK, which is 8255. And get that person in touch with somebody that can handle that crisis. Serious risk factors. Other behaviors may also indicate a serious risk, especially if the behavior is new, if it is increased or if it's changed, or it seems related to a painful event such as loss or change in life circumstances. As I stated earlier in our conversation tonight, we've been dealing with the pandemic for the past, 19 months, longer, almost 2 years now, and people are genuinely suffering. So some of the changes might be economic change, people losing employment, there being a change in family income, there might be death and loss, so losing friends and family members. I know just hearing about the number of COVID-related deaths in our community has been extremely traumatizing and concerning for many people, and they've had an increased sense of panic and fear. Because there is uncertainty, right? They're starting to lose that hope. So these are things that, number one, we need to talk about. We need to really pay attention to someone who might be a little sad and concerned versus somebody who's just feeling completely, out of options. So some of the risks that Ellissa put together for us tonight is talking about feeling trapped or in an unbearable pain. And this isn't like a regular pain. I think you can notice it when you're talking to somebody, how deeply hurt they're feeling. Talking about being a burden to others. This isn't a huge red flag when you're talking about somebody who has suicidal thoughts and feelings. Being a burden to other people, especially to those that you love. As I said earlier, that's where the option of, if I just wasn't here, their life would be better. It would be easier for them. They wouldn't have to manage me on top of everything else they're managing. So when you hear things like that, really begin to ask some questions. And we're going to give you the specific questions and insights that we want you to follow up with people with. And again, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then maybe you can find somebody quickly who could. You might notice increased use of alcohol and drugs. Again, we go back to the pandemic conversation where people have been isolated, they've been home, and drugs and alcohol is a coping mechanism for many people. It is how they manage their thoughts and feelings in a difficult situation. So we see all of that increasing around us right now. Acting anxious or agitated, behaving recklessly. You might notice that somebody's feeling easily agitated, easily frustrated, sleeping too little or sleeping too much. You might notice that somebody is kind of all over the place. They're not well rested. We know that the brain rests and the body heals when it's sleeping. So obviously that's going to further increase the health risk and increase the suicidal thoughts. People being withdrawn or feeling isolated. You know, this is a twofold question because you have individuals who sometimes might be feeling like they want to connect with people, but they're just physically isolated, which is what COVID did to many people. But you might notice that people are no longer willing to engage in family events, in events with their friends. They might not be showing up to church events. And so it's important that we reach out to those people. A phone call, a text message. Sometimes we do not realize the power that those things have in helping people feel connected and feeling hopeful. So make sure you're reaching out and checking on folks. Showing rage or talking about seeking revenge. I think in general, you know, we notice that people who are angry sometimes can say things that are pretty outrageous and are concerning. But this is kind of the next level of rage. It's kind of an uncontrollable outburst. It's when somebody really doesn't have the ability to reason within what's going on. And then you might notice that they are displaying extreme mood swings. So you might notice that they're completely fine in one moment, and then a couple minutes later, they're furious with rage or they're crying. So these are our very serious health risks that we want to make sure that you can identify.
And I did just want to add to, as I was looking up statistics and stuff earlier, obviously we didn't have a ton of statistics specifically about the amount of people who follow through with suicide in relation to domestic violence. However, a big one that did keep recurring was that 65% of all murder suicides are related to a husband and wife, an intimate partner relationship. So that's part of that like uncontrollable rage, is that's when those things occur, especially if an abuser or something or somebody feels as though they have lost control of that situation, if they feel as though their partner is going to leave. That's why whenever we talk about people leaving domestic violence situations, that is the most dangerous time for them. And that's when those intimate partner homicides or murder suicides happen, is in that instance. So that's part of that as well.
And you bring up another really critical point, Ellissa, is that if somebody is having homicidal tendencies, that increases their likelihood for suicide. So many years ago, I worked as a mobile crisis worker, and that was one of the things that we gauged. So if somebody was feeling depressed, anxious, exhibiting rage, and they were directing that towards someone else, the likelihood of that person later on taking their life would increase. So we would have to put immediate measures in place to make sure that they weren't not only going to harm someone else, but they weren't going to harm themselves. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and before we move on to talking about like ways that you can potentially help or kind of identify those things and kind of work to help somebody through this, I did just want to talk about, like, obviously the correlation between abusers controlling their partners, and like a lot of these times, especially when it includes like withdrawing, feeling isolated, that could be just a physical isolation like Jennifer talked about, like their abuser is physically isolating them from everybody else, so they feel as though they're completely and utterly alone. And a big part of emotional abuse is tearing your partner down to the point where they feel as though they are nothing. So if you feel as though you're nothing, what is there to lose? And
Right.
that's when a lot of those people who are in domestic violence situations have gotten to that point, and they feel as though suicide is their only option. So if you do, and obviously we're going to go into this in a second too, but if you see somebody who used to be very, very outgoing, they used to attend events and things like that, that's when those are those times that you need to check on them. Because like, hey, you used to be really social, like you got into this relationship and now you're never see you. Those are big red flags that you should probably be trying to figure out. But those are definitely some things that I thought about while Jennifer was talking, and those are all very serious things too. So
They are, and I like it when we talk because you remind me of things and I remind you of things, so it's a great tag team. One of the things when Ellissa was speaking about isolation, which is so critical, and I thought you were almost going to say it because you said about the emotional abuse, is that abusers will isolate their partners in the home. So they may withhold affection and withhold attention and withhold affirmation. They might go days without speaking to their partner, or may withhold intimate affection. So that is so critical, because an individual might give you glimpses of what their experience is like by constantly checking their phone to see if their partner is responding. Right. So that's on the domestic violence side. But if you are feeling that same way and you're just suffering from a mental health issue that's not related to power and control based violence, you might be having those same behaviors of checking your phone, making sure that, you know, certain people are okay. You might become like very fixated on work or very fixated on friendships or your family. Because you may feel like they're isolating you in that emotional way as well. So isolation does not always mean physical.
well, and I did want to add too, because we just bounce back and forth. So especially talking about like getting anxious and agitated or even behaving recklessly, like if somebody has been sexually assaulted, like they have been violated, they are in a constant state of like trauma, and it's definitely easy for that person to sometimes they completely withdraw from a situation. They feel extremely uncomfortable. They isolate themselves to the point where there's just feeling so much guilt and shame, and they think it's their fault. That could be that burden to others too. Like, okay, obviously this happened to me because of something I did, when we know in reality that's definitely not the case. And on the other side, people could then become hypersexual. They became very, very reckless. They're doing things to kind of just block that part out of their memory. Like, I'm going to take complete control of my life, every single facet. And so I'm going to do whatever I want to do because I don't want to feel that. And so both of those things are very, very
The testing of the boundaries.
mm-hmm.
So when your flight, or freeze response is engaged, you now have moved into your primitive brain. So logic and reasoning no longer play into your behavior, and you test boundaries. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and we definitely talked a ton about this, and we could talk about obviously signs and symptoms and stuff like that all day long, but we're going to get into the more hopeful things, like how can we support each other?
Yes. And that's really what Quigley House and our services are about, is making sure that we connect people with the resources that they need. So for somebody who's experiencing suicidal thoughts and feelings, we're going to connect them to the appropriate resources in the community, make sure that we're addressing these situations no different than we would with a survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault. When you are speaking to somebody who has expressed to you that they are feeling hopeless, that they are having these thoughts and feelings, I think it is very uncomfortable for the average person who's not informed, hopefully you are now informed, to address these things head on, right? So you may have been taught not to talk about certain subjects, and that's why Ellissa said this is a taboo subject. We're kind of taught to stray away from the conversation instead of jumping into the conversation. But it is very, very important that you are extremely direct with somebody who's experiencing these thoughts and feelings. When we say talk openly and matter of fact about suicide, you need to come right out and say to someone, have you ever considered suicide as an option? I think people think, oh, well, if I say that, then, oh my gosh, they're going to act on it. The truth of the matter is that it forces people to have a very real conversation and begin addressing the issue at hand. So it is critically important that we are very direct with individuals and that we ask those questions, even if it's uncomfortable for us. And for some people, they need to say, you know, this is an uncomfortable question, and I'm sorry I have to ask you, but have you had any type of suicidal thoughts? Along with that would be, do you have a plan? So you got to make sure when you open up these conversations that you're also willing to listen. And that sounds so simple, right? Obviously, if you're engaging in a conversation, you're wanting to be open with somebody, you're going to listen. The truth of the matter is that active listening requires a degree of skill. It means that you are not only hearing what the person says, but that you're processing it. You're not immediately trying to come back with them with a solution, but that you are acknowledging their thoughts and feelings. So as Ellissa put here in the slideshow, allow expressions of feelings and accept the person's feelings. So if somebody tells you, this is absolutely the worst experience of my life, and you're thinking to yourself, well, that's not that bad. I've been through worse. This is not about you. This is about that person's perception of what's going on. And we want to make sure that you're addressing their thoughts and feelings. So saying something like, I'm so sorry that this has been the worst experience for you. I can see how much this is hurting you is critically important. She has here, you know, be non-judgmental. And sometimes in our tone, in our body language, we can express judgment without verbalizing judgment. Sometimes by saying to somebody, well, there's no way that was the worst time in your life. What about when this happened? That's passing judgment. That's kind of assuming that one thing had more value than the other, or maybe that this thing should have more value to them. So you want to be very cautious and very careful to focus on their thoughts and feelings and be non-judgmental. Don't debate whether suicide is right or wrong. Do not, let's say, or whether feelings are good or bad. Yeah, you want to take the value of things out of the conversation and make it matter of fact, and don't lecture anybody on the value of life. In these moments, they're very dark for people. They're very serious. They are already contemplating the value of life. And in this point in time, they do not feel like life has value. So attempting to bargain or negotiate that conversation with somebody isn't going to get you far at all. The best thing to do is acknowledge their thoughts and feelings and help them create a positive solution versus judging them. Get involved. Obviously, everything that we're talking about today requires that you step into the conversation with somebody and that you take action. Become available, show interest, and support. So just like Ellissa and I have been discussing, check on those people, text them, call them, drop off a meal. Letting someone know that you care in the most insignificant way to you, again, might mean the world to somebody who's suffering and feels completely alone. Don't dare them to do anything, right? So we've seen in movies and things where people kind of are provocative about the conversation and they like, go ahead, I dare you. What's that going to do? To somebody who's already at that point, that can push them to a breaking point. Be very careful with your words. Don't act shocked. This will put distance between you and the individual. And it goes back to because that shocked response implies a judgment, like that's horrible. Why would you do that? Why are you considering that? What's wrong with you? So gear away from that conversation and really just focus on, I am very sorry that you're feeling this way. Let's try to get you some help. Don't be sworn to secrecy. Seek support. So one thing that we promote at Quigley House in our healthy relationship dynamics is that healthy relationships do not hold secrets. Healthy families do not close doors, right? We are not trying to hide what's going on because this individual has been suffering through that already. We want there to be transparency, honesty. So if somebody says to you, please don't tell anybody that I'm going through this, what you really need to say is, this is really serious. And this is something that I can't promise not to tell anybody because you need help. But what I will do is maybe sit down and have the conversation with you so you don't have to be alone. There's other ways to support somebody than to say, don't worry, I won't tell anybody, because you never know what will happen before the next time you try to reach back out to this person. Offer hope that alternatives are available, but do not offer glimp reassurances. So you can never tell anybody, you know what, don't worry, everything's going to be all right, because we don't have a crystal ball and we can't predict the future. We don't know if things will be right or wrong. When we're working with survivors, what we do tell them is, we are here to support you. And I can assure you that you don't have to go through this process alone, because we're here for you. But we're never going to promise everything's going to be okay, because we just don't know. There are times where we as humans believe that something couldn't get any worse. And then next thing you know, something happens and the situation has gotten worse. So be very careful. Take action, remove means like weapons or pills. It's very important when you're speaking to somebody who has suicidal thoughts and feelings to ask them about their environment. It kind of goes along with asking them about the plan as well, making sure that, number one, they have not thought out the plan to the point where they've practiced it, because that is a high indicator of danger. So we want to make sure that if they are thinking about it, we're talking to them. So, oh, you have a plan and you've thought about doing this by taking an overdose of medication. Well, I'm going to go ahead and take this medication because I want to make sure that you're not going to harm yourself, or taking away the weapons. It also goes along with a simple technique that we used to use when I did mobile crisis, which is making a verbal contract with somebody. I want you to promise me that you will not do anything to harm yourself, and making sure that that person agrees to do that. That way, it gives you the opportunity to get them help, create a plan with them together, and then obviously get help from people or agencies specializing in crisis intervention and suicide prevention. As I said, these are critical situations. They're life-threatening, they're real, and they require professionals. So we've put together a resource list for Clay County. As you can see, we included right in the beginning the National Suicide Prevention Line. That's 1-800-273-8255. We've also included Clay Behavioral Health Services. Their main number to set up an appointment is 904-291-5561. I've also included the Clay Behavioral Mobile Response Team. So this is a team that can respond immediately to crisis, 24 hours a day. And their number is 904-291-4357. And that spells out help. Orange Park Medical Center also has a behavioral health service sector. They provide support groups. They can do psychological assessments. And obviously, if you are feeling that you need emergency help, then you can just present at the hospital in the emergency department. But their number is 904-639-8654. And then if you just need resources in general, you want somebody to talk to, you can always reach out to our helpline, which is 904-284-0061.
And I did want to add that all of the information today was taken from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline website, and I did include their campaign this year for National Suicide Prevention Month is the Be the One To. And so they have a lot of really great resources and stuff on there, and you can find that information, at least the Be the One To campaign, at www.betheone2, like the number 12.com. And you can also call them if you're struggling, obviously. And they have a lot of really good resources on how to help people that you feel you care about are going through stuff. And if you yourself are having those thoughts and feelings too, they have a lot of good information. But
And even their little tag there where it says, hashtag be the one to, ask, keep them safe, be there, help them connect and follow up. Those are all the same tips that Ellissa outlined in our slideshow today.
Yes, so I definitely go check out their website and everything. And that was my bad that I didn't include them on the slides, but definitely all the information was taken from there. And they have really good work happening to help to prevent suicide. So I think there's or anything, all the resources and stuff we have, and a lot of these things are specifically for Clay County. And if you need resources for your area, like if you're watching this and you're somewhere else, thank you for watching, number one, but also you can reach out to your local 211 or something like that to find a crisis center or some sort of help near you. I think that's important to note as well. But if you are in the Clay County, Florida area, these are some great resources. And then we definitely want to thank you for joining us. And Jennifer, do you have anything else to add before we end?
I just wanted to say that kind of reiterate what I've already said, which is we are all in this pandemic, which has uncertainty, isolation, a lot of hurt, extreme grief and loss. Everybody is suffering. We really need to take care of each other in our community, but not everybody has a support. If you know neighbors, if there's people in your workplace that really are alone, taking a moment to check on them is very important. Not only is it the kind thing to do, but you might help save someone's life. One of the statistics that I had heard, and I don't know if this has changed since, because my understanding is that there's been even more of an increase in depression and suicide, but teens are experiencing an extremely high rate, and children in general, all youth are experiencing a high rate of depression. It has increased 20% in the last couple of years, and that was just due to social media. So the last piece of information I heard was that it was up to like 32% rate of depression in children. We know that people who are depressed oftentimes have suicidal ideations. So I say this cautiously to parents out there, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents. If you're watching this, make sure that you are keeping track of youth, monitoring their content and monitoring their time on social media. We already know that that's creating depression. We definitely don't want that to move into a suicidal thought or feeling. There's a lot of cyberbullying out there. And I know Ellissa's done presentations and put information on our website to address that. But I just want us to be vigilant in this conversation as well, to say, bullying on the internet is one of the leading causes of suicide in youth. So knowing the connection between those, and then us as adults really making sure that we're taking care of our youth and monitoring their time. But in addition to that, we also know that there is a tremendous amount of adults that are suffering and having increased depression. And I think the rate for that was like 40%. So if we are having unhealthy, depressed adults, that also means that they're the caregivers to children as well. So just being aware of everything that's going on. And if you yourself are feeling this way, please know that you're not alone. Quigley House will help connect you to the resources that you need. We will be a support to you. and we want you to get the professional help. So that's all I really wanted to add. I appreciate you, Ellissa, making up this slideshow and taking time to put the information out for our community. We thank you so much for joining us and for all the support that you constantly give Quigley House, especially during the pandemic. If it wasn't for the resources of our community and our partners and those that have donated to us, we wouldn't be able to continue to provide the services to survivors. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. And definitely, if you are watching this video on one of our social medias or our YouTube channel, please like, share, do all the things. We definitely want as many people to hear this information as possible, because there are those increased numbers. So we know that people are suffering from these thoughts and feelings, and we want to make sure that they understand, like, hey, I'm not alone and there is help out there. So definitely thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jennifer, for leading this discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate you so much. And just like Ellissa said, please share our stuff on social media, because you never know who's going to read it and the difference that it's going to make.
So we hope that you all have a wonderful night, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.